Hello everyone, back to today's video. Going to have a look at the weather next week, 10 days. In today's video, this takes us well into the second half of September, of course. Been loads of chopping and changing in relation to next week's weather. The latest, it looks like we will get a few days of drier conditions, but perhaps not completely settling down. I think much of this is dependent on what's going to happen with Hurricane Jose. Hurricane Jose will be moving northwards into the northern part of the Atlantic next week. And its exact position and how it interacts with jet stream, I think that is what's causing so much uncertainty for next week. So we'll start off by having a look at Hurricane Jose and also what's happening in the tropical Atlantic Ocean as well. So we've got three areas of interest. These two yellow X's just here are disturbances close to the African coast in the tropical Atlantic. Now, they aren't yet tropical storms. They aren't even hurricanes. They're just sort of areas of thunderstorms within the tropical Atlantic Ocean, sort of a breeding ground for hurricanes and storms. And they've got to be kept an eye on because these thunderstorms might begin to rotate. They might start to turn into a trough, and then from a trough they might develop into an area of low pressure. From low pressure they might develop into a storm, and then from storm to hurricane. There's very much a progression that takes place from the beginning to the end of a hurricane, and it all begins with thunderstorms, with disturbances over towards the coast of Africa. So those two areas need to be kept an eye on, but at the moment not doing anything particularly significant other than producing thunderstorms. This is Hurricane Jose, just here, Category 1 hurricane, still sort of meandering its way around in the western tropical Atlantic, away from the Caribbean, so not really producing any particularly serious weather for populated areas, just sort of being a nuisance meandering around the tropical Atlantic Ocean. Now, the forecast from the National Hurricane Center for Hurricane Jose is looking like this. So, at the moment, Hurricane Jose is just it's probably going to weaken down to a tropical storm tomorrow and into the weekend. So, we find a bit of weakening taking place into Saturday. That's a position of, by then, probably tropical storm Jose. But by Sunday, it's pushing northwards and strengthening back up to a Category 1 hurricane, again, if the forecast is right. Beyond that, this is when the uncertainty is coming in. But the latest idea from the National Hurricane Center is to move Hurricane Jose due north. So that's its position on Monday, and that's its forecast position on Tuesday. By Tuesday, it is beginning to push northwards into the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, it looks like this is going to stay away from the eastern seaboard of the states. This is the east coast of the states there, of course. It looks like it's going to be out to sea. So hopefully they produce some quite big waves, perhaps, for eastern coastal areas of America. Hopefully it won't produce anything particularly serious in terms of rain or wind, although Tuesday's a little way off, and by then it's not that far away from sort of the eastern seaboard of America. It's only a few hundred miles, so we do have to keep an eye on what it's going to do, I think, as we get into next week. And as I say, this Hurricane Jose, what it's doing, I think that accounts for a lot of the uncertainty that we've been seeing for the UK and European weather for next week. All the chopping and changing that's been going on for this third week of September, I think, is primarily down to how the models are handling Hurricane Jose. Keep an eye on that, of course, over the coming days. So, coming back to weather in the UK, this central temperature for September provisional up to yesterday, 13th of September, we're standing at 14.2 degrees, which is an anomaly, almost bang on average. It's actually 0.1 of a degree below average, but let's say it's pretty much bang on average so far for the temperature anomaly for September. We'll probably see this moving downwards over the coming few days, because we are in some quite cool days and some cold nights the rest of this week and into the weekend as well. So I suspect this will be going back down into the 13 degrees Celsius area, not down to 13 degrees, but within sort of 13.0 to 13.9. That sort of area will be as we get into the early part of next week. You can see again, it looks like we've turned the corner on this warm start to the year that we had. So I'll just roll this up. You can see all the CETs back to January. So that was January's CET just there, which came out at 4.0. And it was only 0.1 of a degree above average. So January was about average. But after that, all the months down to June coming out significantly warmer than average. So February at 6.1 is an anomaly of over 2 degrees above average. March at 8.7 is an anomaly of 3 degrees above average. April at 8.9 is an anomaly of 1 degree above average. May at 13.2, that's back to 2 degrees above average. June at 16.0, again around 2 degrees above average. So a long run there from February through to June of running around a couple of degrees above average with a bit of deviation. March comes out at 3 degrees above average, incredibly warm, and April not quite as warm at a degree above average, but averaging out, it's around a couple of degrees above average for the anomaly from February to June. But then we get to July, and you notice it is a bit above average, it's 16.8, but this is an anomaly of only 0.7 of a degree above average. And then August at 15.6, an anomaly of 0.2 of a degree below average. It looks like this is continuing into September, really. 14.2 provisional to the 13th, an anomaly almost bang on average. So it does appear that since the early summer, we have sort of seen the heat begin to drain out of the atmosphere. The warmth has drained out of the atmosphere quite a bit. We're now into our third month that looks fairly significantly cooler compared to what we had earlier in the year, albeit not yet seeing anything overly cold. So no big deviations on the negative side of average. But nevertheless, it does look as though the heat that we have from February to June has drained away as we've gone over the past 3 months. And it'll be interesting to see where we go after that. Will we return back to those very high warm anomalies, or will we cool even further, possibly going into a colder than average period? It'll be interesting to see where we're at by the time we get through to the winter. Right, coming back to weather next week to 10 days then. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation. Actually, these are the 500 millibar height anomalies for the next week to 10 days. We've got the ECMWF here on the top, and the GFS, which I'm looking at in a moment, is on the bottom. 500 millibars, 8,000 feet is an area in the absolute high pressure and low pressure are being dragged by a jet stream running above. Blue is extrapolating to low pressure, red to high pressure. ECMWF has a deep area of low pressure in the Atlantic in the 7 to 10 day time frame, which is going into the end of the third week of September. Now bringing an Atlantic flow through like that, but it is coming up against this ridge up to the northeast, so probably pushing the jet stream northwards at that point. However, it does look a little bit changeable that as we're going through into the 7 to 10 day time frame. GFS also looks quite changeable. So this one has low pressure up to the north, high pressure is down to the south, and we're bringing this westerly flat, westerly flow through across the country. Again, that looks quite unsettled, especially so up to the north. They are rather different, those two charts, for how they're handling the heights in the 7 to 10 day time frame. But they both look rather changeable. So today, we've probably taken a couple of steps back from an extended spell of high pressure setting up next week. Very, very confused picture, I have to say, for next week. Now, these are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensemble. I've only been doing this for 5 years. I'm still getting mixed up with the charts. So these are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles. The red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average, and we're still in this long run of cooler than average temperatures that set up a few days ago. So for the rest of this week into weekend, even in start of next week, we're coming out below the 30-year temperature average. Later next week, we lift those temperatures up, so we get a warmer interlude just there, but not lasting all that long actually, and then we're going back down a little bit cooler than average, and then we get into this period just here, which is more or less going into the final week of September now, and we have a lot of scat events. So there are several members of the GFS ensembles that are quite warm, but there are several members that are quite cool. So this is a really uncertain period, I think, the final week of September. But looking at that chart overall, it does appear that the GFS ensembles, anyway, have backed away quite a bit in the last day or two from what looked like a fairly warm spell that might set up next week and into the final week of September. Yes, there are still some ensemble members that are quite warm, but a lot of uncertainty in there now from as early as around here, really, which is sort of the middle of the third week of September. And there's no real evidence with the precipitation part of this chart either of a prolonged dry spell. So we just get regular precipitation spikes coming through from more or less beginning just here to the end, which is over here almost going to start of October. You wouldn't say that's a definitively very wet spell of weather, but nor is it a particularly settled spell of weather. So just regular intervals of showers, possibly some longer spells of rain too. I have to say there's no evidence looking at that we're going into a prolonged spell of settled and warm weather. Temperature anomalies for the next week, going from the 14th to 22nd of September, are coming out a little bit cooler than average, as they are for much of Western Europe as well. Precipitation anomalies coming out closer to average. If you watch these, I think we looked at them yesterday, they was hinting at drier than average conditions for the week ahead. Now they're near average with precipitation, these anomalies, and it does hint again that we have backed away a couple of steps from a prolonged spell of settled and warm weather. So, just have a look at the generic charts. This is the GFS for Monday, when we're trying to build in a bit of a ridge from the Azores high. That does get into the south on Tuesday, but low pressure is out to the north and west of the country. It goes through to Wednesday and Thursday, when we're trying to turn things unsettled again through the middle part of next week. So the idea that we might build up an area of high pressure, settle things down for a prolonged period next week, that's off the table. I think it will turn a bit drier for a couple of days early next week. By middle of next week, be back to unsettled conditions. Now over here, right over towards Newfoundland, that is Hurricane Jose, probably by this point a tropical storm again. Now, that's Jose just coming into the far left-hand corner of the chart as you are looking at it. And this accounts for a lot of the uncertainty that we've been seeing within model outputs as the Hurricane Jose moves into the northern part of the Atlantic. How's it going to interact with the jet stream? This is the end of next week, where high pressure is trying to ridge in again from the Azores, but that doesn't really come off. So by the time you get through to Saturday, 23rd of September, we're back into quite an unsettled looking scene. We've got a strong westerly wind coming through then, and bringing in tight packed ice bar, so it's windy, also probably bringing in some wet weather as well. Jose looks like it's stalling at this point over here, and then we go through to day 10, which takes us to Sunday the 24th of September, which also is looking quite unsettled. Now beyond this, we might see the Azores high having another go at bringing something drier, more settled for the final week of September. But at the moment, looks like other than a couple of days of drier weather for the south next week, overall it's still rather changeable on today's model output, with the GFS at any rate. ECMWF looks like this for Monday, so still bringing down quite a chilly northeasterly wind on Monday, with high pressure out to the west. That high pressure gradually inches in, so by the middle of next week we are under a bit of a ridge. It is a little bit more settled, but probably quite cool, especially so at night. Into second half of next week, and low pressure starts to move in again. So the ECMWF does bring us a couple of days of drier weather through the middle part of next week. ECM is a bit earlier with that next week, so there's disagreement there, really, from as early as Monday or Tuesday. But both models are implying a couple of days of drier weather at some point next week. But by the end of next week, again, we've got the ECM starting to bring more unsettled conditions back in from off the Atlantic. So that takes us up to day 10, where it is looking quite unsettled, especially so up to the north and west, although still trying to hang on to a little bit of a ridge in the southeast. Out of the two, ECM is probably slightly more settled today, but both of them are hinting, I think, being a little bit on the changeable side. So still quite a bit of chopping and changing going on for next week, actually. But I think we have gone back a couple of steps towards more unsettled side of things, if anything. Thought I'd just finish off with this. Someone asked me today on Twitter what the long-range models were looking like at this time in 2009. You'll remember that the winter of 2009-2010 was our last really cold winter from beginning to end. Of course, we did have the December to remember in December 2010, but then that winter, 2010-2011, turned mild as we got to the second half of the winter. So it's very cold early on in the winter of 10-11, then it turned mild later on. And of course we had some cold weather in 12-13 as well, and that was particularly focused on March 2013, which was severely cold. But the last sort of really cold winter from December right through to the end, February, March, just consistently cold on and off, was the winter of 2009-2010. So I've gone back into CFS archives and I've managed to find this. It's a 700 millibar height anomaly from September 2009 to the winter of 2009-2010. And what the model was doing actually was placing a ridge out to our west. And we'd be doing something a bit like that with the flow and with the jet stream. So it wasn't seeing a particularly cold or blocked scenario by any means. Did have the idea of high pressure being around Northern Europe, but it had the position of this high pressure very wrong. It had it just to the north and west of the UK, whereas actually we know it should have been up here somewhere around Greenland and up there across Scandinavia as well. So it didn't really have the pattern for the winter at this point in 2009-2010. The temperature anomaly that it's going for the winter of 2009-10, interestingly, was milder than average of the UK, Ireland, southern Scandinavia, although you notice quite a bit of cool here across many central and southern parts of Europe. So we wasn't all that far away from cold. It's possibly hinting at something, but it certainly didn't have the very cold pattern that's set up for Europe and for the UK in the winter of 2009-2010. Precipitation anomalies for the winter 2009-2010 from the old CFS model. It has upgraded from here, of course. This is the old version of the CFS. So this is the precipitation anomaly for 2009-2010 from September 2009. And it was going for a drier than average winter, so it had that right. We did have quite a dry winter, as we usually do. When winter is cold, it will usually be dry. But again, you notice the greatest anomalies to average are sort of across France, Germany and the Low Countries, which implies it was seeing maybe ridging to the south of the UK actually, whereas we know in the end the ridging was all up here from Greenland and Iceland over towards Scandinavia. So possibly it was hinting at something, but it definitely didn't have the pattern at this point in 2009-2010, at this point in September 2009, for winter 2009-2010. Thought I'd just throw that one in for you, going off on a bit of a tangent, which means we've gone on a bit longer than normal for a midweek video. Hope you found it interesting. It is something to keep at the back of mind when we do this longer range stuff, particularly model-based longer range stuff. Very often, the long-range models will not have the pattern when you're talking about a season or a couple of seasons ahead. So, hope you found that one interesting. Coming back to weather right now and weather next week to 10 days. So, still choppy and changing for next week. If anything, we've gone a little bit more to the unsettled side of things again today. It's all down to how models are handling Hurricane Jose. But I think we will probably get a couple of days of drier weather at some point next week. I'll focus that particularly on Tuesday and Wednesday, I would have thought. But we may see things going a bit more unsettled again into the second half of next week. Right, nearly 20 minutes, so better sign off. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.